today we thought we'd have a kind of a more informal question and answer session. We were going to start on the subject of AI because it's something that whenever we bring up internally, we never stop talking about. And I know that when we brought it up in the past in these office hours, people have wanted to talk about it. And we very much like to encourage people to get involved with the discussion if you feel comfortable doing so. I know it's being recorded, but if you wanted to type questions, I'll read them out and we'll read the answers out as well. So please don't feel obligated to put yourself on the camera or speak, even if you don't feel comfortable doing so. It's completely fine. A few updates from the last week at the Documentation Academy. I've met with a few teams at Canonical. The Launchpad team specifically have been overwhelmed by some of the work that's being done on the tasks that they proposed. And we've agreed that I really need to reach out to many more of the teams at Canonical to show them what can be achieved by sharing their tasks on the Academy task list, because it's working for them, and it'd be wonderful to get other projects more involved as well. I know I've said this for a while, but we really do mean it. Similarly, actually, we feel like these office hours are becoming a bit slicker and a bit more useful to people, and so between ourselves, we're going to reach out to quite a few more people and organizations and invite them to join. And we invite you to do so as well. If there's anybody that you'd like to invite or feel they may find this useful, please, don't hesitate to let them know that these things are going on. I think it'd be great to have more of a community around this and more of an open discussion that isn't about like the canonical technical authors. It'd be wonderful if there were technical authors here from other companies that wanted to get involved and present their own things. Just please let us know and we'll make it happen. So for this office hours, we were thought, it was about a month ago or 6 weeks ago now, it was in the middle of the May, we kind of sat around and had a discussion and asked ourselves questions and kind of between us and answered the questions. And we still got some of the questions left over from that session that we never used. And we also have a few other questions that have come up, starting with AI. So we thought we'd have a discussion between ourselves, but also with you if you want to be included on well, we can define what the questions we want to be about AI, because I'm very unsure about whether it should affect things in the world of technical documentation and how it will eventually affect things in the world of technical documentation. So reading off our list of questions, perhaps a good place to start is, if I don't know who's going to answer this, and I can have a go if nobody wants to, but do you think that the term AI is misleading? Does anyone want to have a go at answering that? I can see that Artem is nodding his head.
Indeed, I am.
How do you think it's misleading?
Well, now that's an entirely different question. Let's put it like this. I'm a firm believer in the emergent theory of consciousness. How's that for a starter?
Wow. Okay.
So I would naturally assume that what we have now collectively called as AI or whatever is just a simple moniker because it's pretty handy to describe all of that stuff. But I mean, what it doesn't do, I think Shane raised this point previously, is it doesn't add value. It doesn't create new knowledge. It doesn't do research. It doesn't operate logically. It doesn't rationalize. It's essentially a huge box full of Lego bricks that you can super rapidly shake and get all kinds of fancy results by building lots of convoluted, essentially. Oh, by the way, convoluted is actually a term that some of the neural networks use. Convoluted pipelines. Well, you get the Sagrada de Familia built off of this Lego bricks in no time. This is where we are now. But this thing will not design something completely different. It can optimize. It's a ruthless optimizer, but it doesn't create new knowledge. This is a key distinguishing factor for me. As soon as it does, I mean, it creates a pretty much working semblance of consciousness, of reasoning, or whatever, but this is just a matter of the size of this bag of Lego bricks. That's all.
Okay. That's a really good answer. I'll read out some of the comments that we've had. Iqbal says LLMs are mostly autocomplete and they're not intelligent. Julia says let's start with a light topic. And also Peter shared an article which I'll make sure in the notes. One of the things that you said there, Artem, was that AI, at least we're just using this as like the umbrella term for all of these things, doesn't generate anything new. But I mean, do we generate anything new as technical writers? And Peter, please go ahead. I'm sorry, Peter, it's the same problem with the microphone as last week. Restart Pulse Audio.
Yes, a bit, because it doesn't know when it's wrong, it can produce rubbish.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to jump in there. So first of all, with the phrase artificial intelligence, you're applying a concrete adjective to a subjective and poorly defined noun. Can anyone here define intelligence precisely? We say there are 7 kinds, 10 kinds, 100 kinds. Cats have a different kind of intelligence than fish, and dolphins have a different kind of intelligence than humans. So how do you know what's artificial and what's real? But secondly, if you look at what large language models, which is mostly what we're talking about, what they're doing compared to the human brain, so without, as Julia asked for, keeping it light, in the brain you have the dendrites that receive the signals and the axons that send them. And it's an amazing logic circuit with millions and millions of connections, and slight changes in voltage potential between those two synapses across the synapse can change what gets remembered and what gets decided and what gets imagined. Large language models are nowhere close to doing that. All they're doing is looking at a series of words and trying to predict, based on millions and millions of inputs, what is the best next word. So it's almost as if you have a 2-year-old child who has who's memorized the entire dictionary but doesn't understand what the words mean. People just use this word after this word, so I'm just going to say it. Also, large language models are not designed to be intelligent. They're just designed really to help us make connections. It's almost like a more efficient Google. That's the only way I use it. I can go grab, I can go to Google and I can go through to the 10th page of search results, which is where the actual non-ads appear. Or I can go to ChatGPT and I can ask it a question. I can take that question and take it to Google and find my information more quickly.
And yet Google has replaced its search model with Gemini, its AI.
Which is far worse than, as near as I can tell, is far worse in responding than either Claude or ChatGPT. So they're basically in catch-up mode. I think they're still training, probably. But artificial intelligence, intelligence is going to be intelligence. When a computer can actually, when you have Mr. Data that can walk around and talk to you and tell you things, you have a certain level of intelligence, although he doesn't even have emotional intelligence or social intelligence. He's very awkward. He can't get along well in non-standard situations. So even there, the question of what intelligence means is up in the air. So until you can define precisely what intelligence is, artificial intelligence means absolutely nothing.
But for most people, I mean, for example, take GitHub Copilot. I'm not a coder by any means, but I've asked Copilot to do things in languages that I do not understand, and it will create working code from my requests. That, to me, regardless of the name that we put on it, is some kind of artificial intelligence. And it's also the similar with things like stable diffusion and image generation. Even though what you said is true, the output can appear magical. I mean, was it Arthur C. Clarke that said something like, you know, the difference between science and magic? Julia. Julie's got a hand up, so
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah,
no problem.
I mean, the points you raise are really interesting, all of you. I mean, consciousness, that's a very complex topic. I don't think we've figured out, what consciousness is exactly. Also, creativity, do we really ever create anything, or do we just refine on something that came before us, right? Isn't art like a continuous re-elaboration of something that came before? Those are interesting questions. Also, intelligence. You're right, Bill. It's mostly an autocomplete, but I don't like to see it as a simple autocomplete because if we look back some decades ago, I think the bar for defining intelligence keeps getting higher. I think these things can pass the Turing test, but then now we say, oh, but the Turing test doesn't mean anything. Like if you show, like when I show ChatGPT or Claude or even the voice function to older people, they're like, this is magic. This thing is alive. It's scary, because the technology is so advanced. So it's a bit hard to draw the line. But yeah, I agree that they're not maybe sentient or conscious in a way that we generally understand. But also the analogy you made to a child is interesting, because I think sometimes it's like, when a child is putting concepts together and they are often wrong, right? So, I mean, we all know that ChatGPT and Claude and stuff, let's not talk about Gemini because it's like 90% times wrong. But the difference is that the way they are conceived right now, what they learn in user interaction is not persistent. So they cannot learn, So I think the time when we'll have enough compute and these things will be able to remember everything from the context, then they maybe will be able to do this extra step and learn from their mistakes instead of, resetting everything at each session. So yeah, I mean, is it AI? Can we call it AI? I think it's a catchy term, but in a way, I think it's like a promise of something to come.
Yeah, I would say your test for AI is actually in an old sci-fi movie called The Foreman Project. They put together a computer in a bunker in Colorado that can't be entered by humans once it's turned on. And that computer is supposed to manage our nuclear response. And that computer connects with a similar computer in the Soviet Union and decides that nuclear response is stupid. Humans shouldn't do this. We're going to take over and make human society better. And they kill a few people just to show how powerful they are. But in the end, the computer is able to figure out what each human should do in the book, what each human should do with its life, how that human should be trained and taken care of, down to the point of the computer's creator is tasked with building more interfaces and more intelligence for the master computer. And to make sure that that guy's okay, he literally gives him a schedule every day. You're going to eat 2 eggs, 3 strips of bacon, grits, coffee, toast. And then you're going to run for 45 minutes. Then you're going to take a shower. Then you're going to. So he tries to keep him alive by making him do the things that we would all do if we had discipline. So I wouldn't even call it artificial intelligence. I would call it artificial discipline.
I'm not sure about eating grits though, Bill.
I think I threw grits in there just because I eat them. I don't think the computer figured that out. I think it probably banned those forever.
So Shane's got his hand up. Go for it, Shane.
Hi, Graham. I said in the chat before this that I probably wouldn't contribute, but I can't resist.
This is only the first question.
I feel myself getting exhausted already, even starting to think about it. I want to go back to a few things that have come up already. One is about the question of, do we do anything original as technical authors and technical writers? And I think on the face of it, when you maybe compare us to someone who is doing creative writing, it may seem that it's obvious that we do maybe less original work. But I just would like to say that, you know, if we think that the problem of documentation and the challenge of writing good documentation is solved, then I think the answer to the question is no, we don't do anything original. We just apply, you know, whatever agreed upon laws and rules of documentation. We just apply them mechanically, and that's our job. It's easy. It's just busy work. But I don't think that's true. I think when we're working on some new type of technology and we're trying to document it effectively for specific people with specific requirements, I do think that requires solving an original problem. And sometimes I think if we don't see an opportunity to come up with original solutions, then we might be failing in what we're trying to do. We might just be trying to solve every problem the same way as the problems that we solved before. And I don't think that's often the best approach. The second thing I'd like to say is about how these LLMs actually work, which I don't know how they work in depth, but I know that they rely on data sets, and they're more powerful the larger the data set is. And we're all working on very niche things. You know, when Canonical develops a new technology that works in a specific way, by its very nature, it's not an easy thing to Google because the information isn't out there. When we have to document something that's new and innovative, there isn't a large statistically powerful data set that can be drawn from. That makes it difficult for us as people who, you know, maybe want to Google some of this stuff, but I think it also makes it difficult for the large language models to build up good internally coherent explanations of some of these things that we might be interested in. So I think that the LLMs actually fail when it comes to things like, you know, niche scientific topics, niche technological topics, and these are often the things that, you know, are at the cutting edge, the things that we're trying to explore, the things that we're trying to develop and explain. The last thing relates to the Turing test, and I'd just like to say, like with the Turing test, and you know, what is intelligence and how we can maybe define it when we're confronted with these new purported types of intelligence, is that like the reason the Turing test was developed in the first place was that there was a lot of philosophical conversations about what intelligence was and what consciousness was, and what Turing was trying to do was operationalize the definition of intelligence. He basically wanted to start a conversation. Like, we're having a lot of philosophical conversations. We've been having them for centuries. We're getting nowhere. Let's just try to drill down into some specific way we can think of this so we can test it. And this is something that happens in science all the time. But also in science, as time goes by, you have to come up with new models to understand complex things. You know, in most sciences, they don't look at the equivalent of the Turing test and say, that's the final say. They come up with better ways of testing things. So I think we should be careful about, you know, assuming that we understand what intelligence is or understand what creativity is. I definitely think one of the major benefits of the development of generative AI and LLMs is that it's kind of turned a mirror on us, and that we have to ask some of these questions about ourselves. And we realize that some of these explanations aren't maybe as strong as we'd like them to be. And I think it helps us develop our understanding of ourselves when we try to think about these tools.
Thanks, Shane. I didn't realize that these we'd so quickly become so philosophical with the answers to these questions, but it's really interesting in terms of the anthropomorphism of us judging the intelligence of artificial intelligence, when perhaps the artificial intelligence is condescending to give us the answers at the moment. I don't know. Yeah, Artem, go for it.
I have been down this exact rabbit hole, and I can tell you exactly what lies there. So if we are to assume this, not exactly, probably not the exact term for this, but I cannot find a better one, phenomenological approach, as Turing did before, we are effectively corralling ourselves to well, the only thing we can arrive at with this approach is essentially a variation, any variation of this philosophical zombie concept, where we say anything that looks pretty much like intelligence is intelligence by definition. We arrive at this philosophical zombie concept, and there's David Chalmers all over again, and there is no known exit out of this corner. Story done.
Thanks. Bill, do you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say a couple of things. First of all, we are demonstrating as writers and as engineers why artificial intelligence has such a high bar to meet. We are talking about it, but we're re-examining values. AI does not have values. AI has principles, directions, instructions, but it does not have values, which are amorphous, inexact, vague things that have to be compared and decisions that have to be made moment to moment. I'm not sure how you would get AI to do that. I'm sure there's a way, but I don't think we've discovered that yet. And the second thing is, I have a great Turing test for AI. Can it write Emacs Lisp? So far, none of these things can write any Emacs Lisp that will even begin to run. It's a waste of time for me to even ask.
Well, that question, is the term AI misleading, was supposed to be the amuse-bouche for the beginning of this discussion, but we've just spent 20 minutes talking about it. The next question on the list was going to be, do you think, or do we think, that AI is a threat to technical writing, being technical authors? I know we've kind of verged on that in some ways, but I'd be really interested to, yeah, Artem, it's yours.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good.
Okay. In short, no. As some of people here know, I come from a localization background, which is essentially a fancy name for translation. And as we all know by now, the translation industry has been effectively reduced to zilch by the advent of AI and the related technology of machine translation, whatever you call it. And the thing is, it didn't die. It didn't go extinct. It still persists. It exists. People still can earn their living with it. But what actually happened is that instead of, say, 10,000 translators who were doing everything more or less manually, now you have 1,000. People who edit machine translations or improve them or enhance them, and they are as productive as the previous 10,000, but or even more. And speaking from the employment perspective, which is also important, we as technical writers, technical authors, are in the best place to write this way, because it's only natural for us to start wielding these tools, these instruments of trade, to learn them, to study them, to put them to a better use, rather than for someone who's a complete outsider, not only to AI per se, whatever we call it, large language modules or whatever, but to technical writing and this whole set of experience experiences, I mean, at all. That's it.
If anybody outside of the Canonical would like to chime in, please feel welcome to do so. I hope that it doesn't feel like we're dominating the discussion. I do think that this thing we're calling AI is a threat. I know people who have lost their jobs because the company they work for has replaced their positions with things they generate using AI. And I think the problem is more to do, from my perspective, in the misunderstanding what documentation is and the obligation that engineers and a company has towards documentation. So many companies I'm aware of treat documentation as a sideline, as something that isn't the main deliverable when it is they're working on products. And AI has kind of given them the excuse to make it an AI problem. It allows them to use several different buzzwords at the same time while solving the documentation issue, which they can't really get their heads around. I mean, in that capacity, I do worry in terms of how many people can have careers as technical authors or technical writers. I don't know if it's possible to do an anonymous poll in here, but it'd be interesting to know if anybody does use any kind of AI at the moment to help with the work that they do. So can I create a poll? Start a poll. I don't know if it's, you can, do you use AI?
It's in your triangle, square.
Yeah,
circle.
I want to make sure it's anonymous so that people don't, responses appear without names. Okay, let's see.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to read ChatGPT's response to my question. Do you think AI will ever make technical writers obsolete? And the answer is no. Human language expresses precise things in very imprecise ways. There is very little chance that any AI, any system based on circuits and wires and algorithms, can duplicate that precise imprecision. I would not have thought of that. And it might be total rubbish too, so there you go.
Another aspect I've seen to this is that, you know, for a long time, maybe not in technical writing specifically, but there was a requirement that we wrote for search engine optimization, for SEO. And I feel like for large language models have become the new kind of SEO, writing not so much for human consumption, but for consumption by an LLM and for into a data set that will then provide all the answers. I don't necessarily think that might change what we do, because there needs to be a clarity to how we work that isn't incompatible with AI. Yeah, Ruth.
Yeah, I think as you already said, I think it depends a lot on what status documentation has for a company, and also if it's something that is legally binding, or if it's just something that that a company wants to add just to have something, then AI is totally fine. But if they want to have good quality documentation, they need to have a technical writer, technical author in place. And even if it is working with AI documentation, getting AI to create something and then editing it to make sure it's technically correct. So in this way, I definitely feel there's still need for the technical writer, but of course, it might reduce the amount of documentation that we are going to be responsible for.
Yeah. And I think that touches on another philosophical issue with AI. We're perhaps skeptical about it because we don't directly benefit from its use in terms of giving us more time to do the things that we feel are important in terms of documentation. Instead, it will mean fewer technical writers, more likely, than us being empowered to do other things, just like automation and robotics and other aspects of life. You know, ordinary people don't tend to benefit from those technological improvements. So that kind of verges on the other question, which is, do you think AI and technical writing can be complementary to each other? Does anyone have any thoughts on this they want to share? Yes, Julia.
Well, personally, I wouldn't use ChatGPT to write technical documentation because it's too specific for a number of reasons. But I do think that these tools have great capabilities, maybe to summarize or to condense, extract main concepts. So, for example, if you have to read a lot of pages, like a lot of specs, a lot of material, and you want to do it in a short time just to maybe get a grasp of something, I think that could be an interesting way to use them, to summarize. And of course, that would be for your own learning experience only, not to use it as a summary in documentation. But I see potential, at least for these bulk tasks. Like I think Shane wrote something before, like upscaling images or generating diagrams. This kind of automated stuff that saves you a lot of time.
Yes, Bill.
Well, I guess I've got so many thoughts in my head now. Sorry. I use ChatGPT to plan. So I come up with a plan in my head. Sometimes I write it down. Then I ask ChatGPT to come up with a plan to a very specific prompt. More often than not, it'll come up with a step that I missed, which helps me refine my plan. But I don't take its plan and go use it. I just use that as a prompt to me. So I guess the way to say it is I prompt ChatGPT to prompt me back. So I will think about it instead of prompting it to do things for me. And actually, I even have in my instructions consistent the personal instructions you can put for how you expect it to respond. Do not do my work. If I ask you for a paragraph about something, tell me no. I don't want to ever go there. And so it doesn't. So, yeah.
Oh, thanks. Ruth.
Yeah, actually what I want to say fits pretty nicely with what Bill just said, because my take is that it can also help to just give you ideas and help you be creative in a way, which is the weirdest thing to say about AI. But I feel when I write something, the most difficult part is the first paragraph, because you kind of want to summarize everything that is on this page in one short paragraph, and getting that in place is horrible. But if you just skip the first paragraph, write the rest of the page, and tell ChatGPT to summarize that for you, you probably get a good idea of what you actually want to write in the first paragraph.
Yeah, and I must admit that I've used it less and less. I must admit, I was kind of enamored by it in the beginning, but I use it more like I use a thesaurus. And it's usually just on very small sentences, on just a couple of sentences or 3 sentences that I can't structure or rephrase in a way that I feel I know there's a better way of doing this. And I will just put it into ChatGPT and say, is there a better way of saying this? And I'll probably say, no, try again about 15 times, but it'll give me a better idea of what I actually want out of this. I think, Andrea, you did have your hand up, but you put it down.
Yeah, I accidentally clicked it again, but I don't have that much to say because you pretty much nailed it. I use it the same way that you do to help me reword things that I know don't convey what I want it to convey, but I can't think of how to reword it. So it really helps with that. But I also found a bit of a niche use for it, maybe, but I can talk to it in many different languages or tell it how to express something in English so that it has this meaning that it has to me in Portuguese or stuff like that. That's another thing that I found really useful. Not so often, but yeah.
Yes, Shane.
I've often had an experience when using it or trying to use it that kind of reminds me of my emotions when I'm using a graphical user interface. So like a lot of the people on this call would be familiar with using the terminal. And one of the things using the terminal gives you over a graphical user interface is it gives you a lot of flexibility. Like you can get really down into the details, and you can really begin changing things yourself, configuring things. And when you have that experience and you use a graphical user interface, it's easy to become frustrated with the graphical user interface, and you find yourself going back to the terminal because you want that control. And when I use something like ChatGPT, I often have that experience. Write this widget for a website, and it'll do something like, oh, like this. Do you want it like this? And it's like, no, not quite like that. And then you try to give it more information. It doesn't quite give you what you want, and then you spend maybe an hour trying to cajole this thing to give you what you want, and ultimately you just decide, like, I'm just going to do it myself. Yeah. Similar experience with using a high-level programming language versus a low-level programming language, where ultimately you might want to use something like C because you want more control over the computer than something like Python gives you. I often have that experience with these AI tools where I kind of react against them and say, like, you're not giving me enough control, you're not doing what I want you to do, so I'm going to do it myself. And over time, that's basically coalesced into me just using these things less, because I just don't have enough control, and it takes too much work to get what you want out of them, especially if you're trying to do something specific, not just like create a weather app. That's been done 1,000 times. There's 1,000 tutorials for that. But if you're trying to do something interesting or specific, it's not going to do it for you, or at least not to your satisfaction.
Yeah, I've had some luck with asking ChatGPT to restructure things into YAML and things like that, things that it can are clearly defined. But I know there's a pandoc command for that, but I can't wrestle with pandoc every day. Yeah, Artem.
Speaking about the earthly aspects of using ChatGPT or whatever in your daily work, it's indeed very helpful with all kinds of routine, boring, and what's important, tokenizable stuff, like anything that has grammar it does perfectly. Like, for example, my typical task in my previous line of work would involve, okay, take this markdown document in, I don't know, Italian and make it English, translate it really well, and don't mess it up with the markup and everything. And it does it perfectly, and it takes like forever to do by hand. Similar with regular expressions, essentially any pool of menial repetitive work that can be exhausted by these models should be absolutely. It's also a fine assistant in testing your ideas, in acting as a scratch pad. But what I found out, it's not really good at judging finite details of style and substance. You have to do really unreasonable amounts of prompting, and what's even worse, prompting isn't exactly fine-tuning. You cannot tweak one factor without touching other factors, even if you try really hard sometimes. And speaking, by the way, about creativity and style, so far any language model I tried was absolutely abysmally horrible at writing poetry. It doesn't understand how it works, like absolutely, totally, never again.
In poetry?
Yes, poetry.
But then, yeah, I mean, you're right. But I mean, looking at the whole breadth of what poetry is, I mean, there is some poetry I know that I could equally say it's written by humans, but ChatGPT probably does a better job.
But also, I think that goes back to one of your earlier points, Graham, which was about originality, and like as technical authors, what's the original aspect or original contribution that we give. And I think it's sometimes very easy for us to see that with something like poetry. And something like poetry, for example, allows for a lot of ambiguity and a lot of interpretation on the part of the person who's reading it. Whereas conventionally in technical writing, we don't, or we try to remove it. We try to remove the possibility that two people would interpret something that we've written differently. And I think one of the questions I would have, if we ever found ourselves in a situation where we said, this generative AI model can actually do what we do exactly as we do it right now, I think we'd then have a question as to whether there's more we can do. Like, can the writing we do as technical writers or technical authors, can we make it more human? Can we make some aspects of it more open to interpretation? Are we, missing some opportunities in what we're writing to appeal to the people that we're writing for, or more possibilities that we can create for them in the reading? Because I think that's something that these tools struggle with. That's something that poetry gives in abundance. You can't write technical material like poetry, but maybe there's some aspect to it that could provide inspiration for the next kind of documentation, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I really like your thinking, almost like the knot of the output from AI is something that would be interesting in terms of what it's missing and what we should be focusing on, or the inverse. And it kind of leads on to the next question, which is very philosophical, actually. Is one optimistic or pessimistic about the role of AI in our collective futures? Iqbal says, yes, they're optimistic. I think people are already abused. That doesn't sound very optimistic. Pessimistic. So Iqbal is actually pessimistic. Maybe I'll revisit the poll results at this point, because at the moment, so we've got 7 votes for yes, people do use AI, and 3 votes for no. So I can do the maths. That's 70% say they do use. And I also noticed that the no fluctuated slightly as we were talking about it, because I think some people felt more comfortable admitting that they did use AI in their work. Vladimir, go for it.
Yeah, I think there are no doubts that AI is a very powerful instrument, and with how it could be with any powerful instrument, it could be abused to a very high degree. And what I mean is, like, we started with just social media being some kind of echo chambers and all that, but now when we have all this notion of disinformation, fake news and all, and then at least the theoretical possibility being generated specifically for your exact profile, your interest on the fly, and yeah, the sheer possibility of being manipulated into believing something someone wants you to believe through intimidation and disinformation through AI, this is like, yeah, this is like a scary tale for me at the moment. And I'm not saying that's going on right now, but I don't see any reason for it not happening at the moment. And I think there is no way to tell that it's not happening. Well,
I mean, it reminds me slightly of the situation we were in with proprietary software in like the early 90s, where it kind of, or the 80s, where it kind of felt a little bit hopeless in the fact that it was out of our control and it was untouchable and we had no influence on the way things were going. And I think open source and Linux changed that by making it accessible to all of us and empowering us with the ability to do things for ourselves. And we're not yet at that stage. We can't do that with AI. I mean, I know that there's open source models now, and there's, of course, most of the algorithms themselves are open source, but the compute or whatever is inaccessible for most of us. But that will likely change, and so I'm a little bit optimistic. Artem, you can change my mind.
Well, one particular aspect to my pessimism, which it is something that I call, for myself at least, the advent of the sub-API jobs, where people have to be bossed around by an algorithm, essentially. And this is something we already have in lots and lots of industries, be it Amazon or whatever. Delivery drivers, truck drivers, warehouse people, anybody. And I believe this creates new levels of inequality and dissociation within the society that were previously simply impossible or even unimaginable. And I am quite concerned about that specifically.
No, thank you for sharing that. Julia.
Well, I'll have to speak up as one with a positive outlook because we all seem to be kind of scared / negative. I used to be a pessimist about AI. The idea of superintelligence seemed extremely worrisome and like doomsday kind of scenario inducing. But lately, I think I've seen that there could be a path in which AI becomes like a tool to improve humanity. Okay, so what you said, Artem, is true. I mean, this kind of dystopian future is a possibility, but I can see, I mean, this is completely unrelated from documentation or content creation and such, but just imagine the medical improvements we could have, all this talk about, nanobots curing cancer and I mean, all crazy kinds of theories that you can find if you go on Reddit, for example, but eliminating death, basically. I think we should work, I mean, not us, not me, definitely, but the people who are involved in the development of AI work toward alignment, as they are trying to do, to produce, if it ever arrives, a superintelligence or a general level intelligence that is actually friendly and aligned with human values. So I've become a believer in this possibility. I used to be negative, like you said, Artem, but no, I think there's a chance for us.
Thanks, Julia. Okay, Bill, go for it.
Well, quickly, you're talking about tools. I think tools matter in the way you use them. A lot of people make fun of me because I use Emacs, but Emacs forces me to think.
Don't make fun of you, Bill.
No, you don't, but other people do. But it forces me to think every single day, all day long when I'm using it. I can't just push some button and do something incredibly stupid and then try to spend an hour undoing it because I know exactly what I'm typing. I have to think about it in order to get it in there. My own telephone, I have a command line interface on it. I don't use any graphics or any pictures or anything like that because otherwise I'll sit here and I'll start pushing other buttons and I'll be on my phone for an hour when I just meant to check the weather. So if you remove the eye candy and the toyishness and the unnecessary distraction from the tool, I mean, it's great to have a super powered propane-driven electric hammer that will drive nails in a minute. But then you're going to start thinking, oh, I could chop down that tree with this. And pretty soon you're misusing the tool and getting yourself into all sorts of trouble. So you've got to keep your tools. Your tools have to be built so that the human has to make an effort to use them, in my opinion. That's just my personal philosophy. Sorry. Sally, I think you're
don't
next.
apologize. Sally, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. So in that kind of similar sort of vein, the first introduction that I ever had to AI was in astronomy, actually, where they were using it to try and classify and try and identify asteroids. And so they were
Dyson sphere then, Sally. I was going
to No, nothing as exciting as that, I'm afraid. But there's a lot of near-Earth asteroids, and they were trying to find them and classify them. But one of the biggest limitations that they had is that they can't actually see certain types of asteroids because they're the wrong shape or they're made of the wrong material. So the AI that they had was very, very good at identifying the asteroids that they could actually give it training data for. But the training data missed out entire classes of asteroids that they don't even know are out there because they don't have any kind of data to train it on. And so I think that as long as we understand what the limitations of the tools are and the fact that it's only going to reflect what we put into it, then I think it makes sense for us to use it the way we would with any other tool. But especially when it comes to things like medical science and using AI in medical research, I think we have to be even more careful because there's already massive biases in medical research. And if we're using the data that we have to train AI to find, different illnesses, different treatments and whatever, there are very real and present dangers to entire groups of people who, are not reflected in whatever scientific data is being fed into the AI models. And so, yeah, in certain cases, we have to be really super careful.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Shane, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Graham. I guess I'm just thinking about this idea of being optimistic or pessimistic about AI, which is obviously this thing that's being actively developed. It's rapidly changing. It's hard to keep a hold of in our minds. But like, if we think about a technology that's been around for a lot longer in the tech space, something like social media, could we now say with a great degree of confidence whether that has been a success or a failure in terms of its contribution to society? So that's something that we have more evidence for. We understand it better. And if you're thinking back to 30 years ago, if someone was to present you the technology of social media and say, this is something that's going to be developed, are you optimistic or pessimistic about it? You could say, I'm optimistic or pessimistic, but 30 years later, how do you feel about it now? Has it been a success or not? And I think it's actually a very difficult question, even with something that already exists in the world and that we know very well. When these technologies were introduced, the leaders in that area would say things like, we want to connect people. And implicitly there was a kind of a promise that, when people connect, they connect in a positive way, and it's good for society when people connect. But obviously, using social media, people have also connected with adverse consequences. So the original idea that we just want to connect people, it's actually a thicker, more complex concept. It can have positive or negative consequences. So I think with something like AI, we know less about it than social media. We're at an earlier stage than with social media. So I think the question of whether we should be pessimistic or optimistic, well, first of all, I think we should always err on the side of optimism, because it's easier to live our lives that way, and easier to contribute to conversations that way. But I think taking something like the social media example, I think we need to just be a little cautious about expressing kind of wild pessimism or optimism, because even when we have more information than we currently do, it's very hard to give a solid answer. And I think the problem I have with the visions of AI that are presented, is that there isn't a coherent view of what success looks like. Most of the leaders in the area are actually presenting quite a pessimistic vision, which is that this is something that could do a terrible amount of harm. We need to be regulated. And we could talk at length about what the motivations are behind some of those conversations. But I think that when the vision of optimism doesn't actually have a coherent endpoint where you can say, this is what that better world looks like, then I think it's difficult to be optimistic about it. So when people express like great optimism about such a technology and its development and its spread through our social world, I guess I would like to hear more, not necessarily from the people in the call, but from the leaders in the area. I'd like to hear more about like, what does that vision actually result in?
Yeah. I mean, I think actually Artem nailed it at the very beginning in terms of, for me, it's creating something original. And I mean, it's been a long time since I was at university and did truth maintenance neural networks. But my understanding has always been that the context of machine learning is huge. The capacity to have all of these things in memory at once and then draw assumptions from them is huge. So, if AI is capable of understanding that it doesn't recognize all of the asteroid shapes and then makes an assumption that there could be others and these are the shapes to look for, and then looks for them and then finds them, and presumably the same looking for patterns in DNA or other huge data sets that humans just are incapable of even trying to draw parallels between. That, to me, in my naive understanding of it, would be a positive, optimistic outcome.
Yeah, to me, it's easier when you look at the narrow use cases, like, you know, a specific successful application of AI in, you know, a medical treatment, a specific application of AI in increasing the, you know, resolution of an image that will, you know, allow someone to better recall a family member in older age, or something really specific where you can actually test that potentially. But when someone just says, this is the future is super intelligence, it's going to change the world, nothing's going to be the same, all these jobs are going to be wiped out, it's just going to be like the previous technological revolutions except different somehow, you know, that's not a clear vision. That's just saying this is something that's disruptive and it's something that's marketable. So I guess I like hearing the specific examples where possible.
Thanks, Shane. Iqbal, go for it. We've got a couple of minutes left, or a minute or 30 seconds. Honestly, this conversation has been fairly alienating for me. I'm in information security where AI is treated as either inconsequential or a virus that must be cleansed. I cannot use anything AI generated without compromising my past and future integrity. I think we may have a sector by sector difference, even within IT, that may be deterministic. Trust is king with InfoSec, and no one educated in cyber security trusts AI. I can totally understand that point of view. It's a bit like, you know, if you're a developer, you can't really trust the solutions. If you have to work in a black box environment where you have to prove that all of the ideas originated within a team you're on, you can't use AI, and I imagine it's the same in InfoSec. But thank you all. I mean, we've used up the hour. I've really enjoyed the conversation, actually. The hour has flown by. So thank you all, everyone, for taking part. Thanks for everyone who joined. I'm going to stop the recording now.